Hello, and welcome to the Prodigal Life. I'm Deacon Harold, and joined as usual by Nick and Ellen. And we are here to help you make a more intimate, personal, loving connection with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Today is part two with the guest from our last episode. And if you didn't listen to the last episode, I want to highly encourage you to do so. Ellen, would you like to make a formal introduction?
I would. We have a great guest with us. It's Eric Shceidler, and he's with the Pro-Life Action League. And they are a very, very beautiful organization about getting how you can get involved in your community to be more involved with the pro-life action. So we're going to have Eric tell us a little bit about himself, just to introduce himself, and then we're going to go right into where do we go from here?
Yeah. And
how does that work? But first, before we go there, we're going to have Deacon Harold speak theologically, and maybe Eric will interject with him as well, about, why Catholics have to be pro-life. Where is it? What is our theology? It's a tenet of our faith, I think.
Even foundationally, what does it mean to have to be pro-life?
Correct. All of that. And if you can speak to that, Deacon, we really appreciate that.
Well, the whole foundation of God's relationship with us is love and life, right? God loves us. And because of that love, that overflow of that love is what creates everything in the universe. Mm-hmm. God could not contain the love that he has within himself. And so everything that exists from super massive black holes, which many scientists think is the origin of, galaxies and things like that, to the smallest neutrinos that are even smaller than subatomic particles. I mean, everything that exists is created out of God's love, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, we see that biblically when it comes to us, as we talked about in a previous episode, the relationship between love and life, that life is an expression of God's love, even as part of our humanity made in his image and likeness. We also know that God himself is love, right? Jesus Christ and life. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? So it's very integrated into who we are. So therefore, we have to have a deep respect and reverence for all life, including nature, right? That's something I had to learn moving from, the hood in Newark, New Jersey, to Oregon, where there's rocks and trees and nature and butterflies, that kind of stuff I wasn't used to, so I've come to have a deeper appreciation for life, and its expressions in nature. But of course, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, we have a special gift within us to be able to recognize the presence of God in the person standing in front of us, right? And life, therefore, at all stages, right? From the moment of conception until natural death, right? And what this culture tries to do is try to separate love from life, right? And what you create, when you do that, you create an emptiness, a chasm, a void. And as human beings, we try to fill that emptiness because we don't like to have that feeling in us as human beings. We don't like to have that space. So we try to fill it. And what do we fill it with? Drugs, alcohol, porn, work, whatever it is. And it never really closes that gap. What closes that gap is a deep, intimate, personal relationship with Jesus Christ, which starts with recognizing the presence of Christ in every single person, whether it's the unborn child or the person on their deathbed. It still has an intrinsic value because they are a person created in the image and likeness of God. So just one little last thing here, because I was having actually in an airport, again, someone saw this, and saw the crucifix and miraculous medal and decided to have a conversation with me. And they asked me, so you believe that a child in the womb is a person? I said, yes. And they said, well, it's not a person, it's elements of a person. I said, oh, so let me see if I've got this straight. So you have dough over here. You have cheese over there. You've got sauce over here. You've got mushrooms and pepperoni over there. Those are elements of a pizza. Okay. When you have the dough, then you have the sauce and the cheese and the mushrooms and the pepperoni. Now you have a pizza. It's not a cooked pizza. because you got to stick it in the oven, right? And it's got to cook, but it's still a pizza. Sperm and an egg, those are elements of a person, right? But when a sperm and an egg come together and fuse with a spiritual soul by God, now you have a person. It's not a fully developed person, but it's still a person. I said, when you go into Papa Murphy's, you don't say, excuse me, can I get elements of a pizza? Right?
Yeah.
They give you a pizza, which you have to go back and cook. I said, so that child has to cook for 9 months, but it's still, and so they kind of looked at me like they're trying to find something to say, but I think that made sense to them, you know? So they said, oh, and they kind of walked away from me, you know?
Well, even the notion of a fully developed person, that isn't until you're like mid-20s.
Right.
And then you start aging backwards, or, growing backwards and aging.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is just, it's such a logical fallacy, the whole thing. And it's such a lie. And it's so sad because so many people fall prey to it. And that's why the work that Eric is doing is so important.
Oh, it's great to be with you. I would suggest that maybe the fully formed person is the one manifest in the resurrection.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's
There you
what
go.
it's all about. You know,
That's awesome.
If you didn't hear the last episode we recorded with Eric, I want to highly encourage you to watch it or listen to it. Eric's story, testimony is super important, and I'm sure a lot of people would resonate with it and find aspects of it that they can relate to. And also a great testimony to share with people who are on the fringes of faith, or struggling to navigate, if they were cradle Catholics and trying to, navigate the question of how to adopt the faith as truly their own or not to. And I think that the last episode is a really great story for that. So I highly encourage you to check that out. But Eric, can you tell us about the organization that you work for and run?
Well, the Pro-Life Action League was founded in 1980 by my father, Joe Scheidler. He had been a pro-life advocate professionally. It was his full-time work from about mid-1973, shortly after Roe v. Wade, until he founded the league. But he saw a need for an organization that was going to focus on direct action, to be sort of, I like to call it the boots on the ground for the pro-life movement. And I'm sure that listeners, viewers will have seen those sort of typical images of the pro-life activist. If you think of a guy with a fedora and a bullhorn and a trench coat, that's Joe Scheidler. He was the quintessential abortion activist, so much so that he was finally sued by the National Organization for Women in the historic lawsuit of Now v. Scheidler, which you can read all about in his memoir, Racketeer for Life. And that sort of boosted him onto the international stage. And he was, by the time he passed away in January 2021, he was regarded as the sort of godfather of the pro-life movement. And there was a kind of a double entendre there. He was the godfather in the sense of a spiritual leader, somebody who had been an example to people and an inspiration to people. I mean, the countless pro-life activists, from heads of organizations to people who just go out and pray 40 Days for Life, are there because they were inspired by Joe Scheidler. But he also had this tough, bold, aggressive kind of a demeanor to him, the sense of the godfather. And he was sued for being a racketeer, like the mob.
Like the mafia.
The same law used to go after the mafia was used to go after Joe Scheidler. That case was eventually thrown out. He was exonerated, but he had that image of the tough guy, the godfather, the person who was organizing things. So that was his role in the movement. And I came to join him in late 2002 after several years at an organization called the Gift Foundation, which was focused on Catholic teaching on marriage and sexuality. And I'd learned a lot about communications in that job, and he wanted me to come on as communications director. And I was elevated to executive director in 2009 after taking over more and more of the league's operations, especially our historic battle against the Planned Parenthood Mega Center, the first of the really huge abortion facilities Planned Parenthood had built up in Aurora, Illinois. And so I've been executive director since 2009. And the Pro-Life Action League equips, recruits, and trains pro-life leaders. We look for people who will join us in national events like the next event that's coming up for us is our Way of the Cross for Victims of Abortion. Hundreds of abortion facilities, people will come out and pray these special prayers, these Way of the Cross prayers for the victims of abortion on Good Friday. So that's our next event. We hold several nationwide events every year. We also help people to organize their own protests of say, a Planned Parenthood fundraiser in your town. We're experts at this. We have the signs, we have the know-how. We can help you identify public and private property lines. We can teach you how to deal with the police. We can school you in dealing with counter-protesters. We can provide you with all the tools and guidance and expert best practices that you need to work with the media or to communicate through social media or email or print media. We are experts in every aspect of pro-life activism, even things you'd never think of, like the weight of paper. We have to know as pro-life activists about paperweights and glossy versus matte finish and different types of color profiles so we can produce our literature. It's amazing the different corners of knowledge you burrow into as a pro-life activist, and we have it all. So the Pro-Life Action League is there to make you a more effective advocate for unborn children in your own community.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So how widespread is it? Do you have representation in throughout all the states in North America, international, or?
Well, we don't have chapters per se, but we work with local leaders, some of whom work with other groups. I mean, a lot of our Pro-Life Action League local leaders are also working with Sidewalk Advocates for Life or also working with 40 Days for Life. There's a lot of crossover there. But we have a list of about 1,200 different leaders that we can reach out to when we're holding an event. Some of them will do just one event with us each year. Sometimes it's somebody who, every few years will, decide to join the Pro-Life Action League for some event or other, and other people who do every single thing we ask them to do all throughout the year. So in any given year, we will coordinate between 500 and 750 different protests, rallies, vigils, prayer marches, whatever it might be. Christmas caroling is another thing that we do. So we have, hundreds and hundreds of discrete events taking place across the country in any given year. And some of those events are big, a couple thousand people will come to an event that we help to coordinate in St. Paul, or sometimes it's very small, just a dozen friends praying a rosary at a memorial outside of a church on the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children every second Saturday of September. So we do a host of different things, and we have a host of different kinds of folks that we work with, many of whom never organized anything before they got on board with the Pro-Life Action League. So we are there to take you from zero to wherever you want to go.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. And now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, I think there's some thinking in some corners that, okay, well, we're good now, but now the battle's going into individual states. Right. You see like New York, California, Illinois, others are passing.
Well, Michigan's
another one too.
Michigan just put it into their constitution.
Minnesota.
Oh, wow. See, and they have other states, just the opposite, Texas and Florida and others that are,
doing the opposite.
So how does that, or does it change the kind of the tenor or the focus of Pro-Life Action League's work now?
It's a tremendous change for us. And we are still, not just the Pro-Life Action League, but pro-life activists, and in fact, the entire pro-life movement, still really struggling to understand what just happened and where we might be going from here. Because now we have, I like to think of it in terms of red, blue, and purple states. We have red states like a Florida or a Texas, where the opportunity to save babies from abortion through the law is very real. There may be less opportunity in those states to save babies from abortion through other aspects of the law. There may be less willingness on the part of those legislatures to provide the kind of real material support that women need. So there's a challenge for us in red states. In blue states, like where I live, Illinois, our challenge is anticipating what the pro-abortion forces will do next. Right now, there's a horrible, horrible bill that's just been introduced in Illinois that looks like it would allow the Attorney General to sue crisis pregnancy centers, pregnancy resource centers, for disinformation before they even disseminate any so-called disinformation. It's an extremely draconian law. If the Attorney General thinks that a pro-life center is going to say something he considers inaccurate, he can bring a massive fine and even shut them down potentially. That's just one example.
Similar that was being introduced here in the town that we're recording from.
Yeah. All over America, there's this battle taking place in state houses and even in city councils over whether this will be a sanctuary city for abortion or a sanctuary city for unborn babies. these battles are happening all over the place. And of course, there's the purple states like Wisconsin, which technically has abortion is off the books now because of an old law, but where the state is very mixed and things could change. Will they be able to forge a compromise in a state like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania that would advance the cause in ways that might be creative and different from anything we've seen before? So we're really trying to get our heads around this new world, and things are changing fast. I mean, Indiana is a red state. You'd consider Indiana to be a very pro-life state, and they passed a very pro-life law last year, but that law is held up in the courts. So we're still seeing abortion in Indiana. That may change soon, and that'll affect Illinois as women stream over the border in this state that is aggressively embracing every possible pro-abortion provision. So it's very, very challenging and new time, and we're retooling for it as we speak. So I don't have all the answers, but I have some answers in some ways that I think things are going to change.
Wow. And now I think there's another issue that's kind of really critically important because they're trying to get where you can get the morning after pill like at your pharmacy.
Okay,
like across the
hold
country.
on, let me stop you right there. I want to be very super clear about our terminology right now. The morning after pill is already available at pharmacies and even in some cases over the counter. The Plan B or Ella, that's a pill that a woman takes within hours or days of having sexual intercourse, which is intended to act as a contraceptive. Its primary action is to prevent conception. Many people don't realize this. This is listen to the last episode and you'll understand that I became an expert in fertility cycles in an earlier life. Many pro-life people don't even really understand that a child is not conceived immediately from an act of sexual intercourse. It will take sometimes days for the sperm to make its way up the fallopian tube to the egg if it's going to successfully fertilize that egg. And so the emergency contraceptive pills are intended to disrupt that semen's effort, the sperm's effort to get to the egg, various ways. Now, there are some theoretical conditions under which emergency contraception might cause an early abortion. I think some pro-lifers overstate the likelihood of that. I think it's fair to say that it's possible, but also we have to acknowledge that we don't really know how often that actually happens, and it's something that it would be very hard to even determine with any certainty. That is completely distinct, however, from RU-486, also known under the trade name Mifeprex or under the generic name mifepristone. That is not intended to be a contraceptive at all. It is a drug designed to do one thing and one thing only, which is to destroy the life of a very early embryo or fetus. It does this by cutting off progesterone so that the woman's body doesn't produce this nourishing progesterone, a hormone that creates the environment in which the newly formed embryo is able to implant into her uterus, form a placenta, and flourish and grow into the little baby that's born 9 months later. So RU-46 is an evil, evil medicine created by a French company. Roussel Auclaf or something was their name. That's the RU and RU-46. And to me, spiritually, it almost seems as if the devil himself was willing to surrender on Roe v. Wade because a medication abortion was entering the picture in such a big way that would allow the killing that he's after, that he seeks, to continue. Because medication abortion pills are very easy. There's another pill called misoprostol that is taken a day or two after the original mifepristone pill that causes heavy uterine contractions. Misoprostol is a perfectly legitimate medicine. It's an anti-ulcer medicine that also causes massive contractions that will expel that now dead embryo or fetus out of the woman's body. So this two-drug concoction, mifepristone and misoprostol, is easy to transport over state lines. It's easy to sneak into a woman's beverage, which has happened. It's easy to sell on the black market. It's going to be very difficult for pro-life legislatures to prevent these medicines from coming into their states and killing unborn children, contrary to the will of the people of those states and the laws that they've enacted. So it really almost makes Roe v. Wade a moot point. Dobbs v. Jackson, the law, the ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, almost is moot. We're going to see, though, whether states are willing to enact strict measures. We'll see. There's an effort right now by some attorneys general and pro-life organizations to get the original FDA authorization for RU-46 revoked which would stop all abortion pill sales. So please pray about that. That's going to be coming soon, a ruling one way or the other. So it's a completely, that throws us off more. The Pro-Life Action League has been involved in trying to convince Walgreens, CVS, and Rite Aid not to go through with their plan to sell these pills at local pharmacies. And we are also preparing a flyer about medication abortion that people can share with their friends and neighbors to put them on alert as to how pernicious this is, and also just how incredibly painful and traumatic an experience it is for a woman to undergo one of these medication abortions.
I find it interesting. Thank you so much, by the way, for that detailed illustration of those different dynamics that are at play in the different medications. Super, super helpful, I'm sure, for many viewers and listeners. I know for myself it was.
I didn't know half of that.
Yeah,
so,
no. And that's part of the issue is they almost deliberately, keep the clarity of all of those details under a haze, because the less people understand it, the easier it is to lie to them about it. But I also want to say, you were talking about how the Roe versus Wade being removed is almost a moot point because of this pill. Even if the number of deaths is still somewhat lateral, there is something I think fundamentally important as a society that we not, even if we're moving it to the state level rather than just federally addressing it as a crime to commit an abortion. At a minimum, in removing Roe versus Wade, at the federal level, we aren't saying, yes, this is a virtuous thing to do. And I think that in terms of the long game and what has gotten our society to where it's at now, where so many people think it is virtuous and if nothing else, morally, ambivalent, or not ambivalent, but just, not of moral consequence to have an abortion. It can be a virtuous thing. It can help your career or whatever. I think a big part of what has allowed our society to get to that point is the fact that it's been legal. And so if something is legal, then it must be okay. It must be good. And I think that at a bare minimum, that is going to help us in the long game to have removed Roe versus Wade as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was really troubled as the overturning of Roe v. Wade began to appear like it might actually happen. Because if you'd have asked me 3 years ago, I'd have said, well, not in my lifetime, maybe in my grandchildren's, it's going to take so much change. And then out of nowhere, suddenly this thing is here. And I was concerned that people would grow complacent, that pro-lifers would hear about this and then they would kind of, we won, hooray. I was concerned our donations would drop off, our volunteers would drop off. But none of that's happened. And I think in a way we have the pro-abortion movement to thank for this. When that draft was leaked and they started to freak out and started, holding protests and throwing, Molotov cocktails through the doors of pregnancy centers and spray painting up churches and stalking the Supreme Court justices, Holmes, and that one fellow that seemed like bent on assassinating Brett Kavanaugh. The pro-life community saw very clearly that this is not the end. And then, of course, the horrible losses in Michigan, in Kentucky, in Montana, and in Kansas, where either pro-life measures were voted down or pro-abortion measures were voted in by the people. The people of Kansas rejected a statement that their constitution doesn't protect abortion. It's complicated, convoluted. We could unpack some reasons for why that happened, but a lot of it's just cope. I mean, we were not ready. We maybe could never have been ready. There may have been some systematic reasons. There may have been some leadership reasons why we weren't ready, but we weren't ready. And nevertheless, we were handed this sort of gift of some of these failures that made it very clear to our donors, our volunteers, the pro-life movement, and the church that this battle is only just beginning, and we need all hands on deck.
Amen. Yeah, you mentioned that you were worried about some of the donors and activists growing a little complacent as a result of Roe versus Wade being overturned. I actually found for myself, and I'm wondering if anyone out there can relate to this, I have been somewhat of an activist. I've been very involved in a lot of pro-life events, and actually tomorrow I'm leading musical worship for a prayer vigil at the only remaining abortion clinic in Northwest Ohio, and I do this frequently throughout the year and whatever. And I've been doing this for years and attending the March for Life in DC. you know, getting yelled at and spit at by the counter protesters. And, you know, it really, and after years and years of voting pro-life, trying to get pro-life candidates into positions of power, after years of this, I started to grow weary of like, is this a moot point? Like, is this irrelevant? Like, if we have consistently voted as many times as we have pro-life politicians into power successfully, and yet nothing has changed, is this ever going to change? Is it even possible? And I was growing very like spiritually weary about this topic. And when I saw the first tweet, I remember to this day, I happened to be laying on the ground in my living room playing with one of my kids or something, and I saw this tweet come up on my watch, and I quickly put my kid down and I pull my phone up and I'm like, am I reading this right? And it was when it was a leak from the Supreme Court. It wasn't officially announced, but I saw this leak and I'm like, I had this surreal, like, is this like an alternate universe? Like, did the Mandela effect just kick in and I'm in another universe right now? Like, what happened? And it was so, I had a really hard time processing the reality of it because I had grown so calloused and like, you know, this is never actually going to happen. Like, I'll keep showing up, I'll keep playing guitar and singing, I'll keep praying, I'll keep getting spit at and yelled at, but this is just part of existence at this point, you know? I don't know if that really, you know, if anyone listening or watching can relate to that sentiment, but I was so caught off guard. I wasn't ready for the announcement from that standpoint.
Yeah. When I first heard about the draft opinion being leaked, my very first thought was, this has got to be a hoax.
Right.
It can't possibly be true. But then I found my way through the Politico article to the actual draft, and I started reading it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is real. There was no doubt. It sounded like what you'd expect from Samuel Alito if he were going to be making this case. It resonated with what I'd heard in the oral arguments. I was there at the Supreme Court when the oral arguments were being broadcast to the rally outside the court.
Wow.
And I took my breath away. I mean, literally took my breath away when General Stewart got up, the Solicitor General of Mississippi, and it just immediately in his first paragraph called for Roe v. Wade to be overturned, and so emphatically. And then as I listened to the arguments, I became more and more convinced that it might just happen. And so it just. But then once we saw that this was the draft, now you're just anxious, and it's. Listeners, go back to the previous episode where I talked about, you know, when I came back to the Catholic faith, I wasn't hit with this incredible fullness of joy and you know, lightness of feet, but rather more of a sense of the responsibility that comes with being a Catholic in the world. And I was shouldering that burden. You know, similar when the final ruling came out, instead of the moment of absolute ecstatic elation we would have experienced had it been a complete surprise, instead we were simply relieved that it hadn't been watered down any. We were really robbed of our joy. But I wonder if it wasn't in part so that we wouldn't become complacent and we wouldn't be oversatisfied. We'd realize this is just a beginning for us.
See, for me, that I agree 100% with what you just said. But once it finally was announced, and I actually was in the Louvre in France staring at a painting of Our Lady.
Wow. When
it was announced. Like, I know exactly where I was. I'll never forget where I was standing the moment it hit the wire that it had been overturned. And like we sang the Ave Maria in the middle of the Louvre. I was on a pilgrimage, and like there were a bunch of Catholics. We were all together, and we literally just burst out in the Ave Maria in the Louvre. So like it's just this, you know, it's just surreal. It was very surreal. The whole thing was surreal. But I think what it did for me, once I was more, I don't want to use the word worried because worried isn't the right word, but I just knew what was coming. Like, and I was trying to prepare myself for the craziness that was about to ensue, because like the culture of death was not going to go quietly into the night. And I knew that. Yeah. And I didn't know what was going to happen next. You know what I mean? And so for me, there was this cautious I was cautiously grateful and happy. And yes, we were singing the Ave Maria, but inside of me, there was this turmoil of like, oh my gosh, are they going to bomb this center? Is there going to be this? Are they going to, are there going to be mass murders or, people just stabbing pregnant women? You just don't know. I mean, if you don't care about life, what's to prevent any of that from happening other than just trusting God and knowing that he will, do his best to protect. So for me, it was very hard to be extremely excited because I was more concerned about what was going to be coming next. And that's what I was worried about.
Well, it was I had a lot of mixed feelings that day. From what honestly, my very first reaction was, oh crap. Because I had been, I launched a campaign, overturnroe.org. And we organized Dobbs Day rallies all over the United States. We didn't want this to just be a Beltway event. So while I was there with my big Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade banner and rallying and listening to the oral arguments, there were events taking place at 100 locations all around the country where pro-life leaders had gathered with their volunteers and friends at federal buildings and state capitals and places like that, so that this was something we were all participating in together, calling for the Supreme Court to overturn Roe. Because I knew they were going to they needed to know that there was a group of Americans who would support that and not just go rioting and go crazy. And so we had also planned to do Dobbs Day rallies, the day that the ruling actually came out, especially after we saw that leaked draft. But we didn't know what day it was going to be. And that Friday, I didn't think it was going to be that day. And I had completely different plans. And all of a sudden, I had to just yank everything. And now we're, immediately issue a press release, do a whole bunch of stuff, alerting our leaders to get out there, and then head downtown Chicago to Federal Plaza for a rally where we hope no one's going to throw any, bricks at us or whatever.
Right.
That same day, after our rally in downtown Chicago and getting in the media and so forth, getting very little protection from the police. They were incredibly obnoxious and unhelpful when there were people, getting in our faces while we were doing our press conference. I got a call from one of my brothers, and he was letting me know that a very, very dear friend of his who he'd known for 20, 30 years had basically broken up with him, said, he can't have anything more to do with him ever again because of this ruling. And then the next day, a friend of mine that one of my hobbies is I do improv. I do comedy improv. And during COVID, of course, the theater was shut down. So I formed a team, and we called Soul Stream. We formed a team and hired a coach, and we did Zoom improv for a year and a half. We did shows. I mean, people came to our shows, and you can find, if you go to Facebook, you can find the Soul Stream improv
That's
team.
fun.
That's awesome.
And I don't want to out any of my friends from there, but one of my friends was he basically said the same thing. Like, I hearing your mother's voice on the radio made it impossible for me. I just can't work with you anymore. I can't be around you. I'm too mad. Ultimately, I was able to, a couple months later, I convinced that woman to sit down and have a cup of coffee. I said, I'm sorry you're saying that. I've had to compartmentalize with you too. Remember one time this woman posted you've seen this post on Facebook, maybe, some Protestant pastor is saying, not that it has to be a Protestant, that doesn't matter. Oh, it's easy to advocate for the fetus because they don't, come at you with, difficult needs in the middle of the night, and, they're not smelly. They don't call you up. It's easy to be an advocate for fetuses. And I'm thinking of the crap my family's gone through, the friendships I've lost, the unfriendings on Facebook, and just the nastiness from advocating for unborn children. It's a very hard thing to do, actually.
Yeah.
And I wanted to reply to her and didn't, but I said, look, I believe in forgiveness and friendship, and the door's always open. So we did get, have coffee and kind of come to understand each other a little bit better. And I said, look, if you understood where I was really coming from, you might not be as upset. And that relationship, I think, is has a potential for really being repaired. But my point with all of that is that I became very keenly aware of how much suffering that ruling was causing for people like her. And she's somebody, she really wanted me to understand that she hates late-term abortion. She said this really weird thing. She said, we don't choose them, they choose us, meaning our children. Our children choose us. So she clearly has some problems with abortion. She's uncomfortable with it. And yet, for her, I was kind of a stand-in for the right wing, religious bigots or something like that. I couldn't turn my back on that suffering that people are perhaps wrongly, but nevertheless sincerely experiencing.
Mhm.
And something about the overturning of Roe v. Wade sort of tuned me into that in a new way. And I think that was a gift from God too.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, it's so important for us to realize that we don't have any enemy in this pro-life movement other than Satan and all of the demonic forces. Like, the people that are pro-choice are not our enemy. Satan and the demonic forces are our enemy. The people who are pro-choice, we need to love, right? I mean, even just this last Sunday, the gospel reading, Jesus was saying, love your enemies, love the people who hate you, right? Like, we have to show up with that. Even if we're like, one of my best friends, Peter Range, he is someone who has literally held hands with abortion doctors and prayed over them, right? Like, he cultivates that depth of a relationship with them, seeing the dignity in them. If we're going to be truly pro-life, we have to acknowledge the dignity in the life of the pro-choicers and even the doctors themselves. So that's immensely powerful. I'm curious how you would respond to, I thought of this when you brought up the quote from some Protestant pastors online and stuff. I've seen so many, even in the Catholic realm, who think much of themselves and how intellectual they are and how concerned they are for what's right and wrong, when they say things like, if you're going to be pro-life, then how about you help the homeless people, and how about you help single moms, and how about you, like, they go, the whole litany. We've heard it all, but obviously we care about those things. And I'm curious. I have my response. I'm curious what you would say to that.
Yeah, that's often called like the seamless garment, right?
Yeah.
So you have the poor and the homeless and abortion, and it's all part of the it's all life. It's all important. It's all the same. As far as level of importance.
I say amen to that. Christ did wear a seamless garment, and our concern for human life should be universal, especially when it comes to innocent life. About the issue of the seamless garment, Cardinal Joseph Bernardine was the one who really advocated for that, and he's beat up for it a lot in conservative Catholic circles. And my parents locked horns with him from time to time. During the time that they were all active, and yet they had a really sometimes begrudging, but definitely sincere respect for each other. And my parents understood that what Cardinal Bernardine really sincerely wanted, was to turn a light on for his more left-leaning social justice Catholic friends, people who care about the injustice of war and addressing poverty and the death penalty and all the rest of it. He wanted them to see that they should also care about abortion. It was not his intention to water down the issue so that, well, if you're against capital punishment, well, then I guess you can be pro-abortion because it all comes out in the wash. That was never his intention with the seamless garment. He wanted to draw liberal Catholics or social justice Catholics closer to advocacy for the unborn children, which he very much had at his heart. He buried, in fact, 2,033 abortion victims at Queen of Heaven Cemetery.
Wow.
In 1980, 87 or 88. We still go out to that burial plot every year and memorialize those children.
Wow.
So, but my response to the people who say, well, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? I like to give the example of Mr. Rogers. Everybody loves Mr. Rogers. Nobody hates Mr. Rogers. I love Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was an advocate for preschool children. His job was to make them feel safe and give them something to watch on TV and maybe teach them a few things about the world. What would you think about someone who went up to Fred Rogers when he was with us and said, hey, Fred, you care so much about these kids, but what about illiteracy in high school? What are you doing about high school dropouts, Fred? If you really cared about these children, you'd be preaching contraception so not so many of them were born. Fred, if you really cared about these kids, you'd make sure they get good job placement. I mean, little kids deserve to have an advocate, somebody who is speaking just to them, the only person in media who's just speaking to little kids. We honor him for choosing his mission and following it. No one says to Sister Helen Prejean, who courageously advocates for death row prisoners, no one would say to her, well, sister, they only wind up on death row because they didn't get a good education. Why aren't you fighting for more literacy in high school? Why aren't you working on after school programs? She chose to minister to death row inmates, and we honor her for that. They deserve an advocate. Likewise, we choose to minister on behalf of unborn children to be their voice. They deserve to have a full-time advocate. Nobody demands that anti-war advocates first put an end to fist fights before they can advocate against war. No one says to advocate for high school literacy that you first have to advocate for grade school literacy. We recognize in every other way that people are allowed to advocate for a particular person that needs their help. It's only on this issue that they start to tell us we have to do everything else first, which says to me that it's not really a sincere good faith argument. It's really just an attempt to diminish the value of the unborn child themselves. They don't deserve to have full-time advocates. To that, I say they absolutely do deserve to have full-time advocates.
Yeah, it's a distraction. I mean, basically, it's just a distraction, which,
it's a cheap ploy to lob grenades is what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I
Another
think
one you hear is, how many children have you adopted?
Right.
I have not adopted any children, but I have a couple different answers for that. But one time I was in Baltimore doing a Face of Truth tour where we take the victim photos and show them out on the street. This is what abortion is, America. And someone came up and said, how many kids have you adopted? And I happened to be with somebody who had adopted a whole mess of kids. And they're like, I've adopted 4. 3 of them are disabled. I mean, it was, and guess what? The person completely turned. They're like, oh, you'd have? That was not the answer they were expecting. And they could have just been like, you're lying, and walked off. Instead, they actually are like, wow, that's really impressive. I thank you. I didn't expect to hear that. Completely turned that person around. I wish I had an adoptive parent with me at all moments.
Or foster parents, because they do amazing work as well.
But you know what? Let me turn it back though, because I think we conservative, I mean, I'm fairly conservative politically. I'm obviously quite conservative or orthodox or whatever you want to call it when it comes to the Catholic faith. But I think we, on what you might generally call the right in the pro-life movement, Catholic Church, the Christian Church, have been too quick to dismiss those other concerns. We've been too quick to say, well, abortion is such a singular issue. We don't have to worry about this, that, or the other. I think we've been too quick to look at examples like Norway. Norway is a country with one of the most rich social safety nets in the whole world in terms of social welfare. They also have one of the highest abortion rates in the world. We point to that and say, see, we don't have to have good, adequate health care or programs for the poor, because they don't make a difference in the end. Look at Norway and Sweden. But those are very different countries to ours. This is a country where we really might expect a different response to some of the social safety net stuff. So along with tirelessly and unequivocally advocating for laws that protect the lives of unborn children, I've been calling on the pro-life movement to look at other policies that could help to save lives from abortion. So I've been advocating for something called a joint statement for a post-Roe future. This is a statement that I drafted with 3 other pro-life leaders. Josh Brom, who's kind of a center-left Christian. He's a pro-life apologist. He teaches people how to be expert advocates, presenting the pro-life message to anyone in any context. He's a Protestant guy. Charlie Camosi, who's a moral theologian at Creighton University and a kind of a lefty Catholic. Jonathan Van Maren, who's more of a right-leaning Protestant, and I'm a more of a right-leaning Catholic. So we had right, left, Catholic, Protestant, and we drafted this statement acknowledging the victory of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and saying that, while we advocate for the life of every born child, simply banning abortion is not enough. So we're calling for not particular policies, because every state's different, every fiscal, the fiscal possibilities in every state are different. We need policies that can balance the need for our budgets, our state budgets not to get too big, and our need to incentivize work and incentivize engaged parenting. But nevertheless, we can advocate for better health care. We can advocate for expanding child tax credits, more parental leave. the kind of flexible work hours that would allow people to establish families, affordable childcare, which includes at-home care by parents, and then fully enforcing our prenatal child support laws. These are areas where we could reduce some of the pressures that lead to what I'm calling unwanted abortions. This has been like my obsession.
No,
for the last
I
6 months.
I totally agree with you, because the last time I was out on the abortion, in front of an abortion center in Portland, a gentleman came up to me, and at first, it's easy to dismiss him, tattoos and piercings, typical, Portlandy kind of thing, vibe going on. But he said, "What are you doing about the men? There's men out there objectifying these women, and all you care about is the baby. But what about the woman? She needs diapers, she needs food for that kid." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Here's some very specific things," and he wasn't aware. So I think what you're talking about is raising awareness of these other issues. I think will have a very positive effect on people who only think we just focus on this one. On that one issue, but there are broader things around that that we can, I think, will help draw their attention to what we're saying.
So really this important paper that you've written, are you going to release it? Is it something that's going to be published, or?
Well, it was officially released and published and announced to the world in a New York Times exclusive story on the day of the March for Life.
Wow.
So last month, the cover story of the New York Times was about the March for Life. They highlighted me and the work of the Pro-Life Action League and a couple of other folks, Jeannie Mancini from March for Life, and they published a link to our statement. And the pro-life movement is moving in new directions. We had been circulating it for months. We've had a whole host of pro-life leaders. I mean, people like Kristen Hawkins of Students for Life, Lila Rose of Live Action.
She's great.
Yeah, and wonderful advocates. Russell Moore, very prominent Protestant leader of Christianity Today. So we have a broad coalition of academics and activists, leaders, and regular folks, some clergy on there who are calling. And listeners, viewers can go to postrowfuture.com. Postrowfuture.
Okay. We can put a link to that on this podcast.
You can read the statement. You can see who else has signed it. You can see the opportunity for you to sign as well. Richard Dorflinger from the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture at University of Notre Dame, Kristen Day from Democrats for Life. So we've got people all across the spectrum of politics. We're liberals, conservatives, moderates, Catholics, Protestants, atheists are all there, saying, let's do more to help mothers. Let's do more to reduce those, because we know a new study just came out from the Charlotte Lozier Institute, very important pro-life research team, showing that about 2/3 of women getting abortions feel like they're being pressured or coerced, or somebody else is making the decision for them. Unwanted abortion is real, and even pro-choice people should, if they're truly pro-choice and not just pro-abortion, they should recognize that that's a problem that everyone should be pushing back against. Husbands, boyfriends, employers, bosses, anybody who's pushing a woman to get an abortion ought to quit it and ought to be held accountable if they do.
Yeah. I love your emphasis on kind of pushing back on political conservatives and religious to consider the wider spectrum of all of these dynamics. I've heard it put before that if politically left-leaning people want to give a hungry person a fish, and politically right-wing people want to give a hungry person a fishing pole, the call of the Catholic is to give the hungry person a fish and a fishing pole and teach him how to fish. And I think that unless we are willing to think outside of the silos of these, superficial, completely superimposed labels of Democrat or Republican or
conservative,
or
whatever.
liberal, we have to, when I am asked, what are you politically? I simply say I'm Catholic. And I think that we have to start kind of encouraging this line of thinking a little bit more broadly, because until then, there are very real social needs that are going to be ignored.
Right. If conservative means that I have to be opposed to every possible government regulation and in favor of every possible tax cut, and I have to prioritize the needs of American corporations over the needs of American families, then I'm out. But
Right,
if liberal
yeah,
means
exactly.
that I have to advocate for the killing of unborn children, if I also want to feed the poor, I'm out. I don't know quite what to do with those labels, but we're in a moment of realignment. I really think this is true. You hear about the new conservative movement or the new right or whatever. You hear about populism from the left. There's a whole tiny but important growing group of progressive pro-life leaders like Teresa Bukovac of the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. That's the kind of lead on the fight against Walgreens, CVS, and Rite Aid providing medication abortions. So there's a change that's happening now, and I think more and more Republicans, more and more conservatives are willing to consider constructive public policy instead of just saying no to government, saying no to anything new, saying no to every single program. We have to be creative. I mean, if we can find budget neutral ways to encourage people to form families and get down payments for houses, great. But if we have to spend some money on making it possible for moms and dads to stay home with their little kids when they're first born so that they can be prepared for the world, then I think we better spend that money. And if you do the math, folks, I'm sorry. There's 3,000 pregnancy care centers around the country. Do the math. There's not enough private funding to possibly address the needs that would be there if all 900,000 abortions a year in America were not happening.
And then even outside of the realm of the extreme of abortion, within the Catholic culture, we have a lot of things in place. For example, in ministry, whether you're working for a parish or at a diocese, where the infrastructure is such that it really is counterproductive towards the end of having a big, healthy family. So I worked for a diocese for a number of years, and I know for a fact that it's not unique there, that the pay, the salary structure, the different tiers, the entire premise is that both the husband and the wife are working full time. And so they don't pay you enough to have one of the two parents stay home with the kids. Right. Well, how are we encouraging this very beautiful traditional lifestyle where you have a lot of kids and a lot of times the implication is also that the wife stays home with the kids, maybe homeschooling or sending them to parochial school. How are we encouraging that, but making it so that the family really can't execute on that if they actually work in ministry? There's something that there's a cognitive dissonance there. And yeah, there's the political level where on the government level, we need to, work towards some of these more comprehensive issues, but also on the church level, we need to not have a double standard and not be hypocrites about this, because that's why I got out of that type of ministry. Like I couldn't sustain my family. And so I think that, now obviously churches and dioceses, they're hurting for money. I get it. But they're also spending a ton of money on stuff that they probably don't need to. What matters more is the personnel.
Yep. Wow. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. I think
great discussion.
Yeah, really, really good. We went a lot longer than we normally do, but I was not going to interrupt what we were doing because it was really important that we had this conversation.
Well, we're in the early days of the post-Roe world. We're in the early days of the Dobbs world. And it's an exciting time. It's a very exciting time to be involved in the pro-life movement. So if you're feeling like, God, I've kind of missed the boat, I wasn't there for it. No, you get on board now. This is the time to be involved in the pro-life movement. It's going to be strange. I can't promise you what's going to come next, but I think we're going to see more creativity, dynamism, both legislatively and in street activism and in messaging and in the culture than we've ever seen before. So come on board and join us at prolifeaction.org.
Right. That's what I was going to ask. How do they get in touch with you? And is that the easiest way, correct?
Our website is prolifeaction.org. Sign up for emails. You'll be able to be, in touch with what the current news is and what the current actions are that you need to be involved with. Facebook.com/prolifeaction. We're on social media at prolifeaction. And I have a personal page on Facebook with Eric J. Shceidler. You can find me there. Under my handle there, and we can stay in touch, and together we can move forward into this whole
Thanks
new
for all
world.
the work you're doing, man.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, great work.
Thank you for everything you're doing, and we look forward to having you back on another time when we come back into the studio to record again. So, but thank you very much, and God bless you. And I think it would be very appropriate that we go out with a Hail Mary. I think we're going to do the Hail Mary together. I think that would be a very appropriate thing to do. So let's give this to our mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Right. Alrighty. And if you like what you saw and listened here, and even if you didn't, we hope that you join us and come on to the Awaken app and check us out on social media. You can get it at your Google Play Store or your Apple Store, and you can follow us. And then we would really love your support. So if you would like to support us, Deacon's going to tell you how.
Just go to theprodigalife.com, and there you will see different options for support and sponsorship. And we've tied those different giving levels to the hierarchy of angels. So you too can become an angel investor in the Prodigal Life.
Amen. Thank you very much. And God bless you all. Thank you, Eric.